what we really want to focus on today is how we can look at the flexibility and adaptability within healthcare estates, and what are the challenges presented with this, and then what opportunities can we pull out of this in creating flexible, future-proof estates within healthcare. So before we dive into the topic, I want to introduce the panel. So thank you very much to Nicola and Laura joining us, and my colleague Alex. So just like to introduce each panelist. So maybe Nicola, if you don't mind introducing yourself, please.
Of course, yeah. Hi, thank you. So I'm Nicola Climo, Associate Director and Healthcare Planner and Strategic Advisor for ARCUS. I have spent a number of years in sort of construction side, PM actually in the renewable energy sector before moving to healthcare, where I've worked across healthcare, so from community trust and health hubs all the way up to sort of significant hospital rebuilds, be that North Manchester's bid within the New Hospitals Programme, Leighton Hospital, but also hospitals such as the Lin Wenjing Memorial Hospital in Fuzhou in China as well, and currently working on a number of strategic projects for health boards up in Scotland, as well as having spent 18 months working with the New Hospitals Programme as well. And I suppose just finally for me, a little bit of a personal interest is just in relation to the importance of evidence-based design and decision-making, and increased and better capture of data to support that, because we have a lot of data. We just don't capture it well at the moment in a lot of cases. So that's me.
Good, thank you very much. Great to have you with us today. And Laura, over to you.
Thank you, and afternoon everyone, and welcome. So I'm presently the Deputy Chief Executive of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Kings Lynn, in rural West Norfolk. I have worked in the NHS for 20 years, 15 years in board level positions. And when I was at Nottingham University Hospitals, the role before this one, I was successful in getting NUH added to the new hospital programme. I'm touching wood as I speak, but I'm hoping next month we will also be successful in getting the Queen Elizabeth Hospital added to the list of 40 new hospitals on the 6th of December, when we're expecting an announcement. And in addition to leading on the bid here for the new hospital, I also lead on strategy in the trust, strategic estates, and our contribution to the integrated care system strategy across Norfolk and Waveney. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Laura. And Alex.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Shane. And thanks too to Laura and Nicola for joining us on the panel today. I'm very excited about today's conversation. So my name is Alex Harvey. I'm VP of Sales here at Spacestore. The majority of my role actually takes me to some of our workplace clients, some of our clients in the corporate sector, particularly in the US, but globally. So my viewpoint on flexibility and adaptability is very much shaped with that background, and very excited to hear what that looks like in the healthcare sector, and to see what experiences I can bring to the table as well. And also looking forward to learning a lot from our panelists. And also we'd love to invite everyone who's joined us both on the Teams and also on LinkedIn live stream. Feel free to jump in with questions, use the chat box. We've got some great experience here today. I don't know whether any of us are claiming to have all the answers, but I think as the questions come in, that's when it generates good conversation. It brings out experience and brings out kind of what others have tried in the past. So excited to be part of the conversation today and looking forward to it. Thanks, Shane.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Yeah, I'd like to echo that today is really about sharing what we all can and give our bit to try and help each other as we go along this journey of developing healthcare. So glad to everyone has joined, and please do jump in. So on to today's topic around flexibility and adaptability. I thought it'd be good just to maybe kick off with a bit of a starter on sort of looking at what this really means, this flexible and adaptable feature. Don't know if Nicola, you want to share a bit of insights from your work and what you've been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really broad term, and obviously can mean quite a lot by it. I think some of the ways in which we've looked at it in ARCUS are specifically linked to the physical estate, in as much as, you know, sort of obviously we build these buildings and they're meant to last at least 60 years. The NHS has plenty that have well and truly lasted a lot longer than that. But during that time, models of care, practice, digital technology all change how we deliver healthcare. And we're now looking more and more towards the future, which probably means smaller hospitals for acute care, much more being done sort of towards patients. So it's actually, how do we, through this next set phase of sort of building programmes and the work that will be done throughout the NHS estate, make it as flexible and adaptable as possible. So that is, looking at things in terms of floor to ceiling heights and making sure that you've got enough ventilation. The pandemic sort of taught us that, sort of a paper that we worked on with the King's Fund, showed wherever there were sort of lower ceiling heights, the ability to retrofit the ventilation you needed to deal with the mechanical ventilation was difficult. So, and I think it's also quite pertinent in the current sort of capitally challenged environment and the economy that we have at the moment, where budgets are going to get squeezed. But it's really important to remember that the revenue impact is much higher than the capital impact. So if you can make your estate flexible, if you can reduce the amount you have to change it, reconfigure it, alter it, tear it down and start again, then in the long run you will deliver better value, which in turn means more money available to treat patients, which is really what the NHS is trying to do.
Yeah, interesting. And in terms of in future, you mentioned about 60 years, would you think is something that would still work? So, and I noticed about sort of within that 60 years, maybe redesigning sort of every 15 years or adjusting sort of obviously the innovations that happen. And do you think that'd be more of a fluid process, so it keeps adapting as time goes on, rather than longer periods in between each sort of redesign or changes in the estates?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely been, you see cycles of it, sort of from the first PFI to the last PFI buildings, there was an evolution of the estate and how that was sort of delivered. I think it's something that was accelerated during COVID. COVID was obviously, an incredibly difficult time, which would be a massive understatement to say the least. But it did sort of bring forward an awful lot of sort of changes that were in the works in terms of sort of that more digital working, etc. So I think you do get these cycles, as you say, sort of 15 to 20, but COVID has really accelerated some of that in various areas as well. But it's making sure we learn the right lessons from the pandemic. There were lots of things that had to be done because they had to be done. Some of those are good to retain. Some of those we might want to sort of take a step back from, and just make sure that actually what we're looking at is more resilient estate that can flex. Emergency departments was a really good example of that. Emergency departments, of all designs, are usually quite cramped in their configuration, very difficult to sort of stream. We've got lots of different pathways within urgent and emergency care, which makes for quite a fragmented estate sometimes, particularly if you're doing it piecemeal. So I think there's a need to look at what are the key parameters that actually help you to be truly flexible, looking at your standard grid systems and things like that, so that you can change and flex, understanding what parts of the hospital will always be technical and where you might, so by that, sorry, I mean, your hot areas, your theatres, your diagnostics, all of those sorts of things that are high in their sort of mechanical and engineering, sort of electrical engineering requirements. So really thinking about where those spaces are now, where they can expand to. So we see a lot in terms of a good way to try and be efficient on your space is to gradually drop the floor to ceiling ratio as you go up the building. That's great, it does save money, but then in the long term, have you taken into consideration where, if you need to increase theatres, if you need to increase diagnostics, where is that going to go? So I think a lot of flexibility and adaptability is about that future planning for how you might use the estate in the future. We can't answer all of it now. We don't have a crystal ball. We'd get it wrong even if we did. So it's just, all of the known unknowns, really, I suppose, and just trying to make sure that that's really embedded in the way in which we look at estate redesign and planning. Just forward thinking as much as possible. And although I appreciate it's really difficult, and as I say, Laura will probably definitely come in here on this one, but there are an awful lot of challenges around the capital budget always, but trying to remember that saving in certain areas now sounds like a good idea, but has significant issues, both in revenue, operating hospital, workforce impact, but actually in terms of that reconfiguration of the building later on down the line as well. It just costs more money in the long term, even though it's cheaper today.
Go on, Laura, you'd have some comment on that.
Thank you. So I guess no, fully support Nicola's comments. I think starting off with a new hospital programme, there's no better opportunity to really future-proof our hospitals, care and services. And yes, part of the new hospital programme is about standardisation, so we can build 40 hospitals hopefully by 2030. But actually there's an opportunity to really build in this notion of flexibility into that, and there will have to be some bespoke arrangements even within that envelope of standardisation. And I think we all know, and if I think about my own emergency department, you wouldn't design it as it is today because the adjacencies aren't right. We've bolted things on with the right intent where we've had, £1 or £2 million that have landed down the line. But actually you end up with a hodgepodge of things to try and make it work and to try and improve care and the timeliness of care. But actually it just doesn't work. So having a blank canvas for the first time, is a huge opportunity that we need to really make the most of. I think Nicola's absolutely right. There's been huge learning for health through COVID, and we need to hold on to those many positives, not least for us working at pace, because we've shown that you can still have really good governance, but actually work at pace. And we made decisions within weeks that would have taken probably months or years previously. So we've got to keep on with pace, but make sure we've got good governance. We know the way staff are working is totally different, and there is hybrid working, much more work from home, and we need to be honest about what does that flexible model arrangement look like for staff moving forward. Big focus on the importance of staff health and wellbeing facilities and truly investing in that for the NHS for the first time, and really it should be top of the agenda. We're only as good as our people, so we've got to invest in our people, I think, in a really different way than we have historically in the NHS. And of course digital has just transformed at pace in the NHS, and I say that working for the most digitally immature trust in the country. So if we can do it, anyone can, but huge opportunities there. And I think Nicola's right. I think we spend a lot of time in the NHS focusing on getting through to the end of today with the pressures on the front door. What we have to get better at is having a short-term plan, yes, to get through the day and the week, a medium-term plan and a long-term plan. And, you have to have teams that are dealing with the here and now, plus looking to the next 10 to 20 years. And we've got to get that balance absolutely right. And, where we're making decisions on spending capital now, it's got to fit a long-term master plan for your site or your schemes. So we're not wasting money. These are mega schemes. We've just had a £12.5 million endoscopy unit open in our site a few months ago, but it fits with our new hospital scheme. So everything that we're invested in now will stay, hopefully, when we get added to the new hospital programme. And I think my final point, and Nicola and others have touched on this already, is the whole left shift. So what can we truly take out of the acute setting that doesn't need to be on an acute site, both clinical services and non-clinical services, and let's be really bold about that. And I think in the run-up to the prospect of a new hospital, we've got to start piloting some of those services and getting people used to this is all right not being in a hospital. Just because you may have had this service on an acute site for the last 50, 100 years, it doesn't make it right for patients. There's another way. So it's as much a culture and mindset change as it is a building change, and I think all of those things need to be looked at in the rounds.
Really interesting, Laura. Appreciate those comments there. That was one of the questions I had actually in my mind, was the balance between that long-term strategic thinking with the need to, it won't be necessary this month, but this quarter and this year things do change and adjust, and we see that a lot with our clients in the workplace sector. And I'm wondering, is there any kind of structural changes you see coming in the bigger healthcare sector? For 10 years now, a lot of our workplace clients have been starting to look at outside providers, WeWork and that kind of thing, as either expansion space or as alternative types of space. Now, obviously that wouldn't work in a clinical setting, but have you looked at any other kind of different ways of approaching the same challenge?
Yeah, every day, I think, really. And I think just that discipline of the kind of short, medium, long term, I think really if organisations do annual planning right, that's where it should start. So we're already planning now for the next financial year. We know what we need to get on with to deliver our vision. And with that comes really clear milestones. And therefore we should know if money comes down the line from a capital perspective, having those business cases ready and on the shelf. And that's everything from 500k schemes right up to the prospect of an elective hub, for instance, which is a £15 million scheme, and having people working on those so that you're at the front of the queue when those opportunities arise in terms of national capital, because it will happen at certain points of the year. And I think getting on the front foot, having those business cases on the shelf is really key. We know if we look at system planning, actually, whether it be clinical strategy planning or workforce planning, the currency tends to be between 3 to 5 years, which is probably about right, actually. I think anything beyond that, the world moves on, doesn't it? So I think that is probably right. It gives a focus, and I think it's a sensible currency. But I think some of the new developments that we're working on as a system and nationally actually are forcing us to think very differently. So things like diagnostic assessment centres, community diagnostic centres, elective hubs are forcing us to work, in our case, across 3 acutes and a very different scale and footprint, and truly understanding when we say system is the currency and the starting point. Actually, I'm seeing that day to day now a reality in our thinking and our planning, rather than thinking about things on an organisational basis. And we have the prospect, I think a really exciting prospect, of having 2 new district general hospitals in Norfolk and Waveney. That's a game changer, so we have to work doubly hard together across a system to think, actually, what is the acute clinical strategy for Norfolk and Waveney in the context of having 2 new district general hospitals? But what a luxurious place to be in, to design 2 new hospitals. Hopefully that will be in place for 8 years' time, for Norfolk and Waveney patients and residents to benefit from. So I think some of the regional and national developments are forcing a really different way of thinking, which is very much driven, I think, by this left shift that I keep describing. And actually, I had the pleasure of visiting West Suffolk Hospital yesterday, who are further ahead of us in the new hospital programme. They've done some great work and been really bold in looking at what services can move out of the acute setting. But central to all of that has been really strong clinical engagement, really taking the clinical teams with us and with them, and actually doing some pilots along the way, so that actually when you get to do it on scale, people understand actually there's a different way of doing things.
No, absolutely. And I would echo exactly what Laura's sort of saying there. I think the move to sort of integrated care systems and integrated care boards is that fundamental change that is going to see more trust, sort of looking at what they can deliver as a system. And that might mean a service might still be provided by the staff from that trust, but in a different location, on a different site owned by others. We're seeing an awful lot of that sort of shift about. And as you say, Laura, it's the right service at the right time in the right place. Now, a lot of that can mean closer to home, but right place does also mean, particularly with workforce pressures, the right place for that service to be delivered sustainably. So you need your sort of like critical mass of whatever it is that you're doing, endoscopies, etc., to make sure that service can continue to be there. And I think that's what the public want, is a certainty of access and a certainty of care. I think as well, we're seeing a lot more of a drive, sort of through the ICBs, but this was sort of coming before that as well through the SCPs, with working very closely with local authorities and third sector providers. Local authorities at the moment have huge appetite for healthcare on the high street, and the declining high street and the NHS is an anchor institution. It is often one of the biggest employers in many towns, and the economic sort of spread of that employment sort of has far-reaching consequences as well. So we're seeing a lot of schemes where people are wanting to bring people back into city centres to you know, sort of reinvigorate them, but with a different offering. It's not about shopping so much, it is about health and well-being, living and, you know, sort of experiences, etc. So there are an awful lot of opportunities that that's providing in terms of sharing of estate, etc. There are also challenges. Workforce, I mean, I'll probably say it a million times, you know, it's the single biggest challenge I think that is facing the NHS at the moment, and it's not just a UK problem, it's an international problem. So you've got to make sure that we don't make those services frail, you know, by putting them there. But it does offer a massive opportunity, and there's an awful lot of work going on with that at the moment. So I think all of those things are where we'll see the changes shift. And again, you know, comes back to that shrinking. Your hospital will be, and should be, where you go for a really targeted specialist piece of treatment, and then you come back out as soon as you're medically fit to do so, either back home or to somewhere else that can support your recovery. And everything else should be a lot more, you know, agile. And we see that a lot. You know, you've spoken about the clinical engagement, which I love to hear as a healthcare planner. We're all about clinical engagement and making sure that we get in the room with those clinicians and the people on the ground that are delivering care. But we're seeing an awful lot of patient co-design as well, and making sure that we listen to patients. And that's important in two respects, because it gives you an opportunity to take on board their views, but also to help with that patient and citizen education piece that is going to be fundamental to sort of keeping the NHS, you know, on its feet and as we know it, because we see an awful lot. I think the term I've heard a lot from some clinical colleagues is the sort of Amazon Prime type, you know, mentality. I've got a problem and I need it fixing now. Not today, not tomorrow, not in a week, not in 3 weeks, you know, not bothered about the refer to treatment time scales that the government sets, etc. I've got a problem now and I need to see somebody. And that's where you're getting these, you know, massive inflows into ED and things like that as well. So yeah, so I think there's a need to respond to that, and some of that is with education and engagement, as well as being able to provide services in a different way.
Yeah, I would agree entirely, Nicola. I think you're absolutely right about the importance of relationships with local authorities and the third sector, and not just borough councils, but district councils as well. And if we look at our own community diagnostic centre, we're looking at a health on the high street model with some of our ologies. We're just working those through, which is best to move off site into a former high street shop that is an empty unit in the middle of Kings Lynn. So it's a win-win, really. It fits for us in terms of moving a service that doesn't need to be on an acute setting onto the high street, but it also fits with the local authorities agenda in terms of the town deal board as well, and re-energising and reinvigorating high streets across the country. And I think, you know, you mentioned the importance of anchor institutions, and, you know, district general hospitals are those anchor institutions, and fundamentally we should be driving the place-based care agenda. And as you rightly said, Nicola, central to that is the prevention agenda and really addressing health inequalities, which of course we've seen the gap widen, haven't we, through COVID. So I think all of these shifts, which comes back to mindset shifts and changes to just thinking about how do we deliver healthcare, actually have been driven through COVID. And I think that's the right thing to do, because we should be delivering more care at place level.
Just kind of carrying that thought, that train of thought forward. I guess a question for both of you. What do you? So we talked about some of these alternative models where the point of delivery is, as it were. What does that do to your real estate? I'm guessing, you know, when you're designing a new hospital, that's a very different state of play than when you've got an existing building that is, you know, this size, shape, and location. We can't do anything about that. How have you seen people looking to address that along with these innovative delivery models?
So for us, it's perfect timing, because we're just on the cusp of, as I say, hopefully securing the national funding for a new hospital. So it's forcing us to think, what's the acute strategy? What needs to be on site, both clinical and non-clinical services, so back office functions, and looking at it really holistically moving forward, so we can truly right size the hospital. we've forecast that we need, even with that left shift, when we look at the anticipated growth in demand over the next 10 to 15 years, we think we need a hospital 38% bigger. So that kind of shows you how much pressure we're under, and when you factor in numbers of new houses and so on in the area that are forecast over that period, that's where it takes us to. So for us, it's ideal timing, but the key piece of work we've got to do going into Q4 is that left shift, what doesn't have to be on an acute site, and be really bold about that. That's one of the reasons we went to visit West Suffolk, and we're due to visit West Herts next week, because they're known as being ahead of the game when it comes to transformation and new hospitals. So I think one of my other, even with my 20 years of experience in the NHS, never stop learning from other hospitals who are ahead of you, and both from their mistakes, but also things that those organisations are doing really well. We should, we have to continue learning from others who are ahead of the game.
Yeah, and I think in terms of what it means for the estate, I mean, the challenge for the NHS is that the estate is quite diverse, and so you get a lot of not entirely unique problems, but there's definitely not a one size fits all at all for it. So for instance, we've seen so what it does do is it gives you the potential to sort of divest from the estate, and in certain areas that can be a really positive thing, and can be, so you can basically shrink your estate, look at what you actually really need to provide from that site, and therefore if you can remove a little bit, sell it off, the land values are high enough. Now the problem is that is obviously usually typically south sort of UK, and not all of south, but I'm thinking of a project in Brighton, and there are other models elsewhere, sort of the Imperial scheme, etc. All of these ones, and I think West Herts itself would look to release sort of significant land value. The problem is that should come back in as capital spending, and historically I think there was a Health Foundation report back in 2019 that showed that actually of the 400 million in sort of capital estate sales revenue, a quite significant proportion went into actually just revenue funding the NHS rather than being reinvested back into capital investment. So I think where you can, it can give you an opportunity for a smaller estate. I think you need to be careful about it, because as Laura says, you need to have forward planned what your future capacity might be and the future demands in your hospital, and you do not want to sell the silverware in its entirety. So you don't want to have sold everything and got down to your smallest possible footprint. You still need, I'm a big fan of, what's the future expansion strategy? Whenever we build a new hospital, everybody gets very excited about the new hospital, but where's your decant ward, where's your expansion strategy, how are you going to expand the key technical areas, etc. So that's really important. I think one of the challenges of delivering clinical care in different settings is from an infection prevention control perspective. Now, I'm not an infection prevention control specialist by any stretch of the imagination. We do have those within our organisation, but it sounds really easy. I'll put endoscopy in a car park in Tesco's. Then it's not the infection prevention control of the FM sort of pieces that go with that. It goes back to proper planning, proper engagement. Laura says, sort of having those business cases on the table ready to go, having your estate master plan, your development control plan, understanding like what bits of your current estate might be most suitable to divest or might be most suitable to change. One of the things we've got to think about with the New Hospitals programme is a great opportunity. I feel, as probably a lot of people do, it's not going to have the required capital that's actually potentially needed for 40 billion. I think there's a rumour going around that the civil service think they can do it for 20 billion. And I would strongly suggest that is not possible to build 40 new hospitals, plus hopefully the RAC 5 for that. So budgets are going to get squeezed. That might mean you need to retain some of your older estate. Definitely not the case in the RAC hospitals, I would hasten to add, because there's a safety reason for replacing those. But for other hospitals, they might have to look at, you know, what buildings can we repurpose and use? And so again, it all comes back to, it feels like a luxury, particularly at the moment when everybody clinically is working and operationally is working so hard to keep the NHS going, to get that recovery going, to see patients that they've not seen for, you know, a significant period of time. But if we can't get that longer term plan, we can't have the evidence-based discussions and the sort of grown-up conversations with NHSE, with Treasury, etc., that we need to have to make the case for why this is definitely the right option. So I think, yeah, it opens up an awful lot of opportunities for divestment and reuse of estate, but it needs to be considered in the round of your longer-term plan.
I completely agree with that. I think we know if we look across the NHS, and I know I have a certain view because I work in a RAC hospital, and it's, you know, there's not a day goes by that we're not in the media spotlight, because we're the most propped hospital in the country with, you know, now over 3,000 props, quite literally propping up the roof. But too many of our hospitals are just not fit for purpose now in the NHS, whether it be RAC hospitals or hospitals that have very significant backlog and compliance challenges. So I think, you know, our staff can deliver great care, but our patients will never get a great experience in the environment that many of them are being cared for at the moment. So it's not good enough. We've got to accept that. But we move forward, as Nicola said, by having a clear strategy and a clear case for change. And I think, if I'm honest, you know, a number of boards should have been onto these things, in some cases decades ago. So it's about having a strong leadership, really good board of directors, and focusing on strategy as much as you do the day-to-day stuff. I know it keeps coming back to that, but at the end of the day, that's what we're paid to do. Address the here and now, but look to the future. And we've got to keep doing those things in tandem. But, you know, if you look at us as a RAC hospital, we will have soon spent over £100 million on fail-safes for RAC that do not do anything to extend the life of this hospital beyond 2030. So quite frankly, yes, it improves safety, but it doesn't do anything to extend the life of this hospital, and the end of life date for this hospital is 2030. So it's wasted money in the context of the new hospital argument. But of course, it's hugely political.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with another sort of RAC hospital sort of over in the northwest, and, you know, sort of they had a really great plan to build the first part with a standardised ward to enable them to do decant, to do the make safe works, and then that was decided, no, you can only have, you know, a third of the money that would cost to do some modular and do some temporary. So all you do is further compromise the estate challenges, the workflows, the patient experience in the meantime. And actually, by the time you've added in all of the rental costs and the capital costs and the this, that and the other, the value for money argument is massively for the standalone ward block, you know, sort of, that was the first phase and would enable you to get cracking. So there's and the capital planning regime at the moment, with it being in, I mean, it's just been extended to 3 years, but usually annual chunks of money just don't give you significant enough capital to do what you need to do to make the right long-term decisions. It's always the sticking plaster and never the first step in being able to put something together. I mean, there's masses of experience within the NHS and in estates teams. They know, whenever we talk to them, they know what they need to do. You know, it's just, it's making sure that you can actually bring that vision that everybody has or you know, to a greater or lesser extent, together with the funding and how that arrives, because that's a big challenge.
And then, in addition to the increasing challenges we have with ageing estate across the NHS, not just RAC, but of course RAC is particularly challenging because you every day have to respond to issues, and in some cases, in our case, closed theatres. So you're dealing with RAC and that constant jigsaw puzzle of closing things as you do a rolling fail-safe programme over a 3-year period. Then an elective recovery programme when you have lost some of your theatre capacity, and then planning for winter when you're trying to open extra capacity. And actually, there comes a point those things are just an operational nightmare between one of those three things, but actually trying to do all of those 3 things becomes quite an impossible task. And then you step back and say, okay, on balance of risk, is it safer to address the RAC issue in one of these areas or delay the RAC issue because we've got long waits at the front door and that's a patient safety issue? So it's about balance of risk at the end of the day across all of those things.
Thanks, both. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in with a question from Juliana, and she put in the chat. I know, Laura, you did put in a reply as well, but she was asking how would the small hospitals deal with lack of social care in reference to there's a lot of patients well enough to go home but have nowhere to go, and would the new hospital programme be able to address this?
So I think that could be one of the spin-offs. Obviously now integrated care boards and systems and partners are heavily involved in all of our discussions around the new hospitals and the assumptions we're making. So I think, yes, it would be part of those discussions in the rounds, but is the new hospital programme itself going to solve the social care challenges we have? No, but I think it could help to accelerate some of those conversations. And again, some of this is about, it shouldn't take a new hospital programme to actually address some of these things, let's be honest. We should be getting on and doing these things in the spirit of working differently in any case. So I think, you know, I'll give you an example at the moment. We're looking at, we have some gaps in terms of community capacity in Kings Lynn and West Norfolk. We're looking as an organisation, therefore, to run our own domiciliary care package, so recognizing actually we need to do something different to get through winter. So I think, yes, the new hospital programme will help, but I don't think it's the silver bullet by any means. It will just help to have those in the rounds conversations, but actually day to day we're having those conversations as an integrated care system in any case.
Yeah, I would agree, Laura. I don't, unfortunately, I think, you know, the NHP has enough to deal with sort of like just delivering 40 sort of acute hospitals or areas of hospitals. But the, I mean, you do see, you know, you've just said sort of you're looking at it, you know, sort of Northumbria as just, you know, sort of registered as a sort of a social care provider, basically, to be able to provide, you know, sort of care home housing so that they can have beds staffed, you know, sort of nurse-led units, much, you know, sort of cheaper accommodation than the sort of 500 plus a night, you know, sort of accommodation within an acute setting. So you're looking at that. I mean, it's also going back to those partnerships with your local authority and other system partners. There's models over in Canada where, you know, sort of the social care sort of system struggled with actually having the right premises, but the hospital itself had old wards that they didn't, they were rebuilding a new hospital, they didn't need these, they weren't, and they didn't have to, they could have demolished them, but actually what they said was, how about we refurbish them and we offer you the estate and you run the service, and that's how we can then, you know, sort of unblock the back end of the hospital there and get those patients moving. It is really hard for the small hospitals, and I think sort of, you know, federation within sort of ICS and things like that is a way forwards, but definitely sort of looking at those partnerships with local authorities and others in social care to see whether or not you have one part of the puzzle that they might be able to then bring the other piece to is a way to, because it's all about, you know, even with the promise of $1 billion this year, 1.7 billion next year for social care. I mean, I think that was promised back in 2019 or 2020, and I'm not entirely sure that we necessarily really saw anything for it. £1 billion sounds a lot, and it actually isn't when you talk about the scale of social care and healthcare. But I think, yeah, increasingly NHS trusts are going to need to look within the system for the solution, certainly in the short term, I think.
Yeah,
Good, some great insights there. Sorry, Shane, go ahead.
No, that's fine. There's only, as a question I'll just sort of think about around sustainability, and obviously the sort of goals there is around net zero and that for the NHS, those kind of things, and how that really fits in with the sort of estates and being flexible and adaptable, how that would help that, whether you had any sort of experiences on that at all.
So I am by no means a net zero engineer or anything like that. So this would be slightly outside of sort of my core knowledge area, but it's certainly one of the key issues is, you know, building new sounds great, but building new comes with its own carbon footprint from everything that you sort of build in the hospital with. So it is definitely a case that trying to balance the reusing your existing estate as far as possible, but against then the infrastructure that sits underneath that old estate is some of what is driving your poor carbon sort of impact and your difficulty in getting to net zero. So, you know, there's funding at the moment that's sort of been set out by the NHS to sort of de-steam, you know, sort of and get NHS estates off steam. But you know, it does start to get to the point where from a cost perspective and a value for money perspective, it's in direct contradiction to what you would do from a sustainability point of view, which obviously provides a real tension. I think that there is a real need to accelerate how we look at net zero within the NHS estate. That 2040 target is looming. And will be really, really difficult to do. But I think it's going to require more than the odd parcel of money every now and then to sort of help NHS estates over that. Yeah, it's a big challenge. I think is probably what I would say to that.
And I think from through the lens of the new hospital programme, as we await hopefully December time, the drop and the publication of Hospital 1.0, that will kind of set the standard for the model hospital in the new hospital programme, and that will include things like net zero. There will be a way of doing it and a blueprint or a prototype, if you like. Same for modern methods of construction, same for digital. So that will be all spelt out much more clearly once we get to the publication of Hospital 1.0, which will be key.
I think, you know, things like the net zero carbon standard and sort of the sort of digital footprint and then digital blueprint are important. The issue with Hospital 1.0 is it's a whole hospital. And as we've said before, the NHS estate is very different, you know, depending, are you urban, are you rural, are you tall, are you, you know, sort of low rise, etc. And when you start pulling apart a hospital that's been designed and then restacking it, you know, our real preference as an organisation is to really promote standardisation at the appropriate scale. So, you know, because if you start at a room, a bathroom pod, your M&E risers, you know, etc., you can get a lot more volume through that standardisation than if you've got a whole hospital. But it goes back to, again, with the net zero carbon, there won't be one way of doing it. There'll be a number of ways depending on the estate that you have, how much progress you've already made. Some trusts aren't on steam anymore and already well on. An organisation that I was speaking to the other day actually had been speaking locally with a possibility of massive sort of geothermal where they are, you know. So there will be different approaches, and I think it goes back to something that Laura said sort of like earlier on in the discussion. It's about sharing the learning, and that is one thing that I think the new hospitals programme is trying to do, is build this learning ecosystem and sort of making sure that people can kind of easily see where their organisation is similar to another's within the NHS and go, oh, we can take some of that. That would be really, really helpful, because for one reason or another, we're really bad at sharing learning. I think because life goes on at a massive pace, and sort of taking the time to stop and reflect and then even to sort of share it out widely is difficult. But hopefully that is what the NHP can definitely leverage, is that learning community, because I think that's a really big key thing to sort of getting the most out of it and helping other organisations that aren't on NHP but have similar estate problems and maybe looking to access funding pots as they come along.
Great,
Very
thanks,
good.
Nicola.
So I was just going to say, Shane, I think we're almost at time now. So some great insights, and I do love your final thought there, Nicola. Those great ideas spark off other ideas, don't they? And I think as a community, whichever area we're in, the opportunities that unlocks can be huge. So really appreciate both of you taking time today. I don't know if you had any final thoughts, Laura, before we wrap up.
I think, firstly, thank you. It's been really good discussion. I think there have been some, I guess, 2 or 3 key themes. I think never stop learning from others is really key. And I think Nicola's right. And my experience of the NHP is just that actually it really has triggered that across the NHS for me, and both the RAC community, but the broader new hospital programme community. I think, my other couple of comments would be getting the balance right between short, medium and longer term planning, and not losing sight of that. You've got to do all of those things in parallel. It's not one or the other, it's all of those things. And then I think have your cases on the shelf, have your business cases on the shelf, because capital will come down the line, and have them ready to go, to position yourselves to be, ready to put in your bids and secure that funding.
Very good, thanks, Laura, and good luck with the funding when it comes through in December. Nicola, any final thoughts from you?
No, just to say thank you very much, and absolutely echo what Laura says. It's going to probably get tougher for many organisations before it gets better, but I think through that shared learning, through the sort of longer term planning, there's a way to sort of like find a way through. And I think as well, sort of one thing that QEH has done quite well, mobilise your local MPs and your public and get them to understand the issues that you're dealing with as well is always a positive when trying to get on that list of hospitals to be addressed.
And just as a final point, I think in addition to mobilising the local community, and there are others that can say things that you can't, and I think we do that quite effectively, own your own narrative. Everyone else will have a say on whether it be a regulatory review. Own your narrative and don't deviate from that, but be proportionate around the challenges between, again, what are we doing immediately to solve our immediate problems, but what's the longer term solution? But I think in addition to mobilising the local community, as I say, owning your narrative is key, and being consistent in that, and in the spirit of openness and transparency with your local community.
Great points. Thank you very much, Nicola and Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Thank you. See you later.
Thanks very much.
Everyone, thanks for joining.